Okay, seriously. Have you ever felt like just understanding everyday stuff these days requires a PhD? I mean, it's everywhere, from trying to keep up with the latest tech to deciphering business jargon, sometimes even just choosing what to eat.
It's true, we're bombarded with so much information constantly, it's easy to feel overwhelmed.
Right. And that's why I'm so excited about this deep dive. We're going to unpack some super practical strategies for, well, simplifying all that complex stuff, not just for ourselves, but for becoming better communicators overall.
I love that. And we've got a great guide for this journey, this awesome Algo Academy blog post that's packed with tips using examples from the world of coding.
And the cool thing is, these tips apply whether you're trying to explain, I don't know, quantum physics or just getting your point across in a meeting at work.
Absolutely. It's all about making information accessible and engaging, regardless of the subject matter.
Exactly. And they kick things off with a principle that, honestly, I think we all know, but how many of us actually put it into practice consistently? It's all about knowing your audience.
Yeah, it sounds simple, but it's crucial. Think about it. Explaining something to your boss versus explaining it to, say, your grandma requires a totally different approach.
Right. You got to meet them where they are, not where you are.
Exactly.
And this blog post really emphasizes that. It's like, think about their current knowledge level, what they're hoping to get out of learning this thing, even their preferred learning style.
Yeah, it's about tailoring your explanation to make the information actually stick.
Totally. It's the difference between someone completely zoning out or having that aha moment.
I like that, the aha moment. That's what we're going for.
Okay, so once you've got that audience in mind, the next tip is all about starting broad and then zooming in. Big picture first.
Yeah, so often we jump right into the weeds before we've even set the scene. It's like starting a movie in the middle of a car chase. Totally confusing.
It really is. And the blog uses this great example with algorithms, comparing them to recipes.
Ah, recipes. Everyone gets recipes.
Right. It's brilliant. So instead of diving straight into lines of code, they start with that familiar idea, a step-by-step process for achieving a desired outcome.
It instantly makes it relatable.
Even for someone who's never seen, a line of code in their life. Okay. And speaking of making things click, let's talk analogies and metaphors.
Ooh, yeah, these are like communication superpowers.
They really are. It's about connecting something complex to something familiar, something from everyday life. And the post uses this example of labeled boxes to explain variables in programming.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right. It's like, you know how you put your winter clothes in a box labeled winter? A variable is kind of like that it holds information and has a label so the computer knows what's inside.
I like that. But it also makes me think, what if someone's never even seen a physical storage box? Like maybe a better analogy for them would be a digital folder on their computer.
That's a really good point. It shows how crucial it is to actually tailor those analogies to your audience's experience.
Absolutely. No one-size-fits-all approach here.
Okay, moving on. Let's break down the next strategy. Divide and conquer.
Ah, yes, because us humans, we tend to freak out when things seem too big or too complicated, right?
Right? Whether it's a giant project or a brand new concept, breaking it down makes it way more digestible.
Exactly. And the blog uses this example of object-oriented programming, OOP.
Ooh, OP. Now that sounds super intimidating.
It can be, for sure. But instead of getting bogged down in all those details, they suggest breaking OOP down into its four core principles.
Okay, so it's like instead of climbing Mount Everest all at once, you tackle base camp first, then the next level, and so on.
Exactly. Make it manageable, step by step.
I like it. Okay, speaking of making things clear, let's talk about the power of visualization.
Ah, yes, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right?
Totally. Not everyone learns best visually, of course, but come on, visuals can often make things click way faster.
For sure. Think about trying to explain how a car engine works just using words.
Oh, good luck with that.
Exactly. But show someone a diagram, suddenly it's like, oh, okay, I get it.
Right, and the blog highlights Algo Academy's own platform as a great example of this. Their interactive tutorials, especially for things like sorting algorithms, use visuals to help you literally see what's happening.
Yeah, it's a fantastic way to make something abstract feel more concrete.
Totally. And that brings us to another key point, the importance of real-world examples.
Love this one. It's
Mhm.
about making these abstract concepts relevant to someone's everyday life. And they give a great example using big O notation.
Big O notation. Okay, remind me. That's about estimating how long an algorithm takes to do its thing, right?
Exactly. It's about efficiency.
Yeah.
And they use the analogy of searching for a book in libraries of different sizes.
Ooh, okay. I'm intrigued.
So like a small bookshelf at home, that's O1, you find the book instantly.
Got it. Easy peasy.
Right. But a huge GE library, like, I don't know, the Library of Congress.
Oh boy, that's going to take a while.
Exactly. That's more like ON. You might be searching for days.
So simple, but it totally illustrates how big O works.
Exactly. And it gets people thinking.
And that's where the listener comes in. I want to challenge you listening. Think about some tech concepts that you encounter. What real-world examples could you use to explain them to someone else?
Yes. Engage with the material. Make it your own. That's a key theme throughout this whole post, actually.
Totally. Building on that, they talk about using interactive elements to boost learning.
Oh, yeah. Interactive learning's a game changer.
It really is. Algo Academy's coding environments are a prime example. You're actually writing code and seeing it work in real time.
Huge difference. It's like learning to cook by just reading a recipe versus actually getting in the kitchen and trying it out.
Exactly. Speaking of deeper understanding, the next tip is all about explaining the why along with the what.
Yes, not just knowing the facts, but understanding the context, the motivation, the underlying principle.
Love that. The post uses the example of Git, which is a
Version control system for coders.
Right, right. So you can learn all the commands, but if you don't get why Git is so essential for collaboration
And avoiding code disasters.
yes, avoiding those disasters, then you're missing the point.
It's like knowing how to drive a car without understanding the rules of the road.
Right. You might get from A to B.
But it's going to be a dangerous, bumpy ride.
Exactly. Okay, let's tackle this next strategy. It's all about avoiding information overload. It's called progressive disclosure.
Ooh, this is a good one. It's about revealing information strategically, right? Start simple and gradually add complexity as the learner's understanding grows.
They use the example of teaching data structures. You wouldn't start someone off with complex graphs if they don't even know what an array is, right?
Right. It's like teaching someone to bake. You wouldn't start them off with a multi-tiered wedding cake. Start with something simpler, like cookies, and gradually work up to those more complex recipes.
I love that analogy. So progressive disclosure is all about building that solid foundation one step at a time. Now, to keep that learning momentum going, they highlight the importance of questions and feedback.
This is where active learning really shines. Asking questions, it demonstrates engagement. And good feedback helps solidify understanding and correct any misconceptions.
Totally. And Algo Academy has this really cool modern example with their AI-powered assistants. Imagine having this virtual tutor who can answer your questions, point out errors, and give you personalized guidance.
It's like having a learning buddy who's always there to help you along the way.
And speaking of making learning engaging, who doesn't love a good story? That's our next strategy.
Story time. It's true. I never thought storytelling would be relevant to, something like tech.
But it totally is. The post uses this brilliant example of Russian nesting dolls to explain recursion.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Right. Opening one doll to reveal a smaller one inside, and another, and another.
It perfectly captures that concept of a function calling itself repeatedly until it reaches a base case, like the smallest doll in the set.
It's like a story within a story within a story. Okay, listener, I've got a challenge for you. Can you think of a story to explain a complex process in your field?
It's a fun way to stretch those creative muscles.
Totally. And while you're thinking about that, let's move on to our next strategy, which is all about connecting new information to something the learner already understands.
Oh, yeah, building bridges. Makes sense. New knowledge sticks better when you can hook it onto something familiar.
Exactly. It's like, adding a new room to your house, you need to connect it to the existing structure for it to actually be functional. The blog uses the example of explaining APIs.
APIs?
Yes, as for.
Application programming interfaces? I always thought those were so complicated.
Me too.
But they simplify it by comparing it to something everyone knows: the buttons on a vending machine.
Ooh, okay.
So think about it. You don't need to know how the vending machine works internally. You just press a button for your snack and
Now it pops. Exactly. And similarly, an API provides a simplified way to interact with these complex systems. You get the info you need without having to understand all the technical details behind it.
so it's like a shortcut.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of different strategies, and you might be thinking, okay, how do I actually remember all this? How do I make it stick? And that brings us to our next point: repetition and reinforcement.
This isn't about boring, mindless drilling, though.
Definitely not. The blog really emphasizes approaching a concept from different angles, using various methods to make it really sink in.
They use the example of teaching loops in programming.
Hmm.
So instead of just defining what a loop is, they suggest showing different types of loops, relating them to real-world tasks.
Even having learners write their own loops to solve problems.
Exactly.
It's like learning a new dance move. You wouldn't just watch someone do it once and expect to master it. You'd practice it from different angles, break it down into smaller steps, maybe even try teaching it to someone else to solidify your understanding.
I love that.
Okay, speaking of clarifying things, let's talk about myth busting.
Oh, every field has those pesky misconceptions that just won't die. Addressing them head-on can really save learners from going down the wrong path.
Totally. The post uses this great example from JavaScript, the difference between and
Oh, yeah,
curl.
that's a subtle but important distinction.
Right. They explain it clearly, give examples, and help learners avoid those "why isn't my code working" moments.
Frustrating. Okay, now for something a bit more fun. Mnemonics.
Who doesn't love a good memory hack? The blog gives the example of the solid principles in,
Object-oriented design.
yes, which, well, let's face it, it doesn't sound super memorable.
Not really, but when
Yeah.
you know that SOLID is an acronym and each letter stands for a specific principle, suddenly it's much easier to remember.
Ah, so it's like a mental shortcut to unlock this whole system of knowledge.
Exactly. And speaking of putting knowledge into action, let's talk about the importance of practice.
Yes. Theory is one thing, but mastery comes from actually doing the thing.
It's like learning a musical instrument. You can study the notes and theory all day long, but you won't become a musician until you actually pick up the instrument and start playing.
And that's where Algo Academy shines, right? They offer these coding challenges and problems that let you test your knowledge and build those problem-solving skills.
Exactly. It's about bridging that gap between theory and practice.
Love that. Okay, speaking of bridging gaps, our next strategy is all about comparing and contrasting.
Ah, yes, highlighting similarities and differences. The blog uses this really clear visual, a comparison table for arrays versus linked lists.
Okay, so for those of us who aren't programmers.
Right, sorry. Arrays and linked lists are both ways to store data in programming, but they have different strengths and weaknesses.
Louder.
So by laying them out side by side in this table, learners can quickly grasp those key differences.
It's like comparing two different types of cars. One might be better for city driving, while the other excels on off-road adventures.
Perfect analogy. By comparing and contrasting, you can choose the best tool for the job. Okay, and speaking of choosing the right tools, our next strategy recognizes that, well, everyone learns differently, so mix it up.
Yes. Visual learners, auditory learners, kinesthetic learners.
I've got the whole spectrum.
Right. The key is to cater to those differences and provide a variety of learning experiences.
The blog uses the example of teaching a programming language, using multiple approaches: visuals, auditory explanations, written documentation, and even interactive coding exercises.
It's like creating a smorgasbord of learning.
I love that.
Okay, and speaking of providing support, let's talk about scaffolding.
Ooh, scaffolding. Think of it like training wheels for a bike.
Or a climbing guide who helps you scale that mountain.
Exactly. They give a great example using problem solving in programming. So you might start by providing a complete solution, explain each step,
Right.
but then you gradually reduce that support, presenting problems with less and less guidance.
It's about meeting them where they are and pushing them to grow.
Yes, empowering them to eventually stand on their own 2 feet.
Okay, last but not least, let's wrap up this part of our deep dive with the power of peer learning.
Sometimes the best way to solidify your understanding is to try to teach it to someone else.
It's true. And the blog highlights pair programming as a great example of this. Two programmers work together at one computer, taking turns writing and reviewing the code.
Built-in study buddy.
Exactly. And it creates this collaborative learning environment where everyone benefits from the shared insights and different perspectives.
It's a testament to the idea that we can achieve more together than we can alone.
I love that. Wow, that was quite a whirlwind tour of strategies for simplifying complex concepts, and we're just getting started.
There's so much more to explore.
Welcome back to our deep dive into simplifying the complex. So in part one, we unpacked this awesome toolbox of strategies from that Algo Academy blog post. Now let's see these tools in action.
Yeah. It's one thing to understand the theory, right? But actually seeing these strategies applied in real-world situations really brings them to life.
Totally. So let's start with a field that often has to deal with some seriously complex stuff: Healthcare. Imagine you're a doctor and you're trying to explain a diagnosis to a patient. I mean, you've got all this medical knowledge, but how do you make it actually understandable and helpful to someone who doesn't have that background?
It's about bridging that gap, right, between expert and novice. So instead of throwing around jargon like, oh, atherosclerosis, what if the doctor used an analogy?
Ooh, I like where you're going with this.
Something like, imagine your arteries are like pipes,
Mhm.
and over time, plaque builds up inside, narrowing the passageway for blood flow.
Okay, yeah, suddenly it's not this scary medical term anymore. You can actually picture it happening in your body.
Exactly.
Okay, so analogies are a win for healthcare. What else could doctors use from our toolbox?
Breaking things down into smaller chunks is crucial, especially when you're dealing with, a lot of information. So instead of overwhelming the patient, focus on one aspect at a time, making sure each piece is clear before moving on.
It's like giving them a roadmap instead of just dropping them in the middle of a jungle.
Exactly. And this applies to explaining treatment options too. Instead of just presenting, this laundry list of possibilities, the doctor could focus on a few key choices, explain the pros and cons in a way that the patient can really understand.
So it's about empowering the patient to make informed decisions, not just, blindly following orders.
Right, it's a partnership. And speaking of empowerment, what about encouraging patients to actually ask questions? This is a two-way street, right?
Totally. The doctor needs to be open to feedback, willing to adjust their communication style to fit each patient.
Personalized communication, for sure. Okay, let's shift gears to another field that can be notoriously confusing: finance.
Oh, finance. Sometimes it feels like it's its own language, right? Compound interest, investment portfolios, the stock market.
You can make your head spin.
For real. So where do we even begin to simplify all that?
Well, just like we talked about earlier, starting with the big picture is key.
Right.
So instead of diving straight into the specifics of, say, an investment strategy, maybe a financial advisor could start by explaining those basic principles of investing.
Okay.
Things like diversification, risk versus reward, those foundational concepts.
Got it. Build that foundation first.
Exactly. It's about setting the stage before you introduce the more complex ideas. And this is where those trusty analogies come in handy again.
Ooh, I'm ready for some more analogy action. So how would you explain something like compound interest?
Okay, imagine a snowball rolling down a hill. As it rolls, it picks up more and more snow, getting bigger and bigger. That's kind of like compound interest. Your money grows faster and faster as the interest earns interest on itself.
I love that. It really paints a clear picture. What about explaining something even more complex, like an investment portfolio?
For that one, you could use the analogy of a balanced diet. You need a mix of different foods to stay healthy.
Right.
Well, a well-balanced investment portfolio also needs a mix of different asset classes to, weather market ups and downs.
Ooh, that's a good one. Everyone understands the importance of a balanced diet.
Exactly.
Okay, beyond analogies, what about visuals in finance? I feel like those could be super helpful.
Oh, incredibly helpful for making sense of data. You know, a chart showing the growth of an investment over time or a graph comparing different investment options can be way more impactful than just words on a page.
Totally. A picture can be worth $1,000, literally.
Right. It seems like these strategies are really universal.
They are, and that's what's so exciting. We're not talking about, niche tips for specific fields.
Mm.
These are fundamental principles of clear communication that can be applied anywhere.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm ready for another example. Let's tackle a field that can be notoriously dense and intimidating.
Law.
Ooh, good one. Law is a great example of where simplifying complex language is essential, for sure.
Right. Think about legal documents, contracts, terms and conditions, all that jargon.
It's enough to make your head spin.
I've definitely been there trying to decipher a legal document and feeling like I'm trying to solve a riddle. Exactly. And this is where that strategy of relating to prior knowledge can be so powerful.
Oh, yeah, building those bridges from the familiar to the unfamiliar.
Right. So instead of just bombarding someone with legal jargon, a lawyer could try to connect those concepts to something the person already understands.
Okay, so for instance.
When explaining negligence, a lawyer could relate it to the everyday idea of duty of care. The idea that we all have a responsibility to act in a way that doesn't harm others.
Right, so like if you're driving a car, you have a duty of care to drive safely and follow the rules of the road.
Exactly. And if you don't and you cause an accident, that's negligence.
Makes sense.
And that same principle can be applied to, explaining more complex legal concepts. For instance, contract law can be related to that simple act of making and keeping promises.
Oh, I like that. Something we learn about from a young age. So instead of making it sound like this scary, abstract thing,
You ground it in everyday experience.
yeah,
And when it comes to explaining legal procedures, breaking things down into smaller parts can be a lifesaver.
right, because the whole legal process can be so overwhelming.
Totally. So instead of presenting it all at once, focus on explaining each step individually.
It's like providing that roadmap, guiding them through the legal terrain.
Exactly. And the same goes for explaining legal documents.
Hmm.
Instead of just presenting this dense wall of text,
Right.
a lawyer could break the document down into sections, highlight key points, and explain them in plain language.
So it's about making the law feel accessible, not intimidating.
Exactly.
And this is where that two-way communication we talked about earlier is so important.
Absolutely. People should feel comfortable asking questions, raising concerns, making sure they understand their rights and obligations. It's about empowering people to navigate the legal system with confidence.
Yes, not feeling lost and powerless. Okay, so we've seen how these simplifying strategies work in some pretty complex fields. Where should we go next?
Well, how about the world of education? I mean, from teaching challenging scientific concepts to explaining historical events to guiding students through, complex literary works, educators are masters of simplification.
That's so true. They have to make information not only understandable, but also engaging for their students. So what tools do they use from our toolbox to achieve that?
One of the most powerful tools in an educator's arsenal is storytelling.
Oh, I love that. Stories have a way of making learning come alive.
Exactly. So instead of just presenting, dry facts and figures, they weave those elements into compelling narratives that capture students' imaginations.
Okay, so paint me a picture. How would that work in a history class?
Imagine a history teacher recounting the American Revolution, not as a list of dates and battles, but as this gripping tale of courage, rebellion, and the birth of a nation.
Wow, that would definitely make history class more exciting. What about science? How could storytelling work there?
Imagine a science teacher explaining evolution, not as this set of abstract principles, but as this grand narrative of life's journey over millions of years,
Okay, I'm listening.
full of fascinating creatures, dramatic environmental changes, and the ongoing struggle for survival.
Wow, it's like turning science into an adventure.
Exactly. And when it comes to teaching literature, storytelling is already at the heart of it, right?
Right.
But a skilled teacher can really enhance that experience by connecting those themes and characters to the students' own lives and experiences.
It's about finding those universal human truths that resonate.
Exactly.
So it's not just about the story itself, it's about how it connects to us. Okay, I'm seeing the power of storytelling in education. What else?
Well, just like with law, teachers can leverage that power of relating new information to prior knowledge.
Those bridges again.
Right. So instead of presenting concepts in isolation, they connect them to things students already understand.
So, like, a math teacher introducing algebra could connect it to something students already know, like solving for an unknown in a word problem.
Exactly. Or a physics teacher explaining the laws of motion could relate them to everyday experiences, like riding a bike or throwing a ball. It's about showing how these seemingly abstract concepts are actually relevant to their world.
I love that. Okay, what about visuals? Those have got to be key in education, too.
Oh, essential. Diagrams, charts, maps, timelines, they all help students visualize those complex concepts.
Yeah, visuals are like cheat codes for learning.
They really are. And then when it comes to teaching practical skills, like writing or coding, providing opportunities for practice and feedback is crucial.
It's that hands-on experience again, right? You can't just learn by listening, you have to actually do it.
Exactly. And this is where peer learning can be so valuable. Students can learn so much from each other.
Yeah, whether they're collaborating on projects or just explaining concepts to each other,
It's like having this built-in study group.
where everyone's learning and growing together.
Exactly. That collaborative learning environment fosters this sense of community and shared discovery.
This has been such an insightful look at how these simplifying strategies play out in education.
It really highlights that importance of making knowledge accessible and engaging, regardless of the subject matter.
Okay, I'm ready for another adventure. What other fields can we explore?
Well, how about we dive headfirst into the fast-paced world of technology? I mean, artificial intelligence, blockchain, software development.
Hmm.
It's this constantly evolving landscape that can be tough to keep up with, even for, the experts.
Oh, tell me about it. Trying to stay on top of all the latest tech trends.
It can feel overwhelming.
Seriously overwhelming. So, where do we even start to simplify this technological jungle?
Well, one of the most important things we can do is address those common misconceptions.
Oh, yeah, myth busting.
Exactly. The tech world is full of, myths and misunderstandings that can lead to fear and confusion.
Right, right.
So by proactively debunking those myths, we can create a more informed and productive conversation about technology.
Okay, that's a crucial point. Take artificial intelligence, for example. There's so much hype and fear surrounding AI these days.
Totally.
How can we use those simplifying strategies to address some of those misconceptions?
Well, a common myth is that, AI is going to take over the world and steal all our jobs.
Yeah, you hear that one a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
We can debunk this by explaining that AI is simply a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad.
It's not the technology itself that's the problem, it's how we choose to use it.
Exactly. And when it comes to explaining those more technical aspects of AI, like machine learning algorithms, we can use our trusty analogies to make them more relatable.
Okay, so how would you explain a machine learning algorithm?
All right, imagine a student studying for an exam. The student learns from the study material, right?
Right.
Well, a machine learning algorithm is kind of similar. It learns from the data it's given.
And the more the student studies, the better they'll do on the exam. Just like the more data the algorithm processes, the more accurate its predictions become.
Exactly. You got it.
So analogies are a winner for AI. What about another tricky tech concept like blockchain? How would you simplify that?
Blockchain is often described as this distributed ledger, which can sound pretty intimidating.
Yeah, not exactly a term we use every day.
Right. But we can simplify it by comparing it to something familiar, like a Google Doc that's shared with multiple people.
Ooh, I see where you're going with this. Everyone who has access to the Google Doc can see the changes that are made in real time, just like everyone on a blockchain network can see the transactions that are recorded.
Exactly. And because the Google Doc is stored in the cloud, it's very difficult for someone to tamper with it without everyone else noticing. Just like that decentralized nature of blockchain makes it incredibly secure.
Okay, so we've got myth busting and analogies covered. What about the importance of hands-on experience in tech? I feel like that's got to be huge.
Well, in the tech world, practice is everything. You can't just read about coding or software development. You have to actually do it.
Right, right.
And this is where platforms like Algo Academy really shine, providing those interactive coding challenges and tutorials that allow learners to put their knowledge into practice.
It's like learning to play a musical instrument. You can study music theory all day long, but you won't become a musician until you actually pick up that instrument and start playing.
Exactly. And that same principle applies to learning any technical skill. Whether you're, I don't know, building websites, designing apps, or exploring data science, the key is to get your hands dirty and start experimenting.
So we've covered healthcare, finance, law, education, and technology. What other frontiers can we explore with these simplifying strategies?
Well, let's shift gears and delve into the world of art and design.
Ooh, interesting.
From, abstract painting to avant-garde architecture to the ever-evolving landscape of digital media, the creative arts often present complex concepts that can be, well, challenging to grasp.
That's a good one. Because art can be so subjective, so open to interpretation.
Exactly.
So how can we apply these simplifying strategies to something as nuanced as art?
Well, I think a great starting point is connecting art to prior knowledge and those shared human experiences. So instead of presenting a piece of art in isolation, we can try to relate it to themes, emotions, stories that resonate with the viewer on a personal level.
So it's about finding those universal threads that connect us to the artwork, even if the style or subject matter is unfamiliar.
Exactly. For example, when explaining abstract expressionism, we could connect it to the idea of expressing raw emotions through, color, gesture, and form.
Okay, so how would you phrase that?
You could say something like, imagine you're feeling overwhelmed with joy or sadness or anger. How would you translate those feelings into a visual language? That's what abstract expressionist painters were exploring.
Ooh, that's a great way to frame it. It helps the viewer connect with the emotional core of the artwork, even if they don't understand all the, technical details.
Exactly. And when explaining avant-garde architecture, we could connect it to the idea of challenging those conventional norms, pushing the boundaries of design.
Okay, yeah, I like that.
We could say something like, imagine a world where buildings weren't just boxes, but sculptures, landscapes, or even living organisms. That's the vision that avant-garde architects were pursuing.
Wow, that really changes how you look at those unconventional buildings.
And when explaining digital media art, we could connect it to that ever-evolving relationship between technology and creativity.
Okay, yeah, that makes
We
sense.
can say something like, imagine a world where art isn't just, static images on a canvas, but interactive experiences, immersive environments, or even, living, breathing digital organisms. That's the frontier that digital media artists are exploring.
It's like art is constantly breaking free from its traditional boundaries.
Exactly. And to help viewers understand and appreciate these evolving forms of art, we can use that trustee strategy of breaking things down into smaller parts.
Right, so instead of trying to explain an entire artistic movement or style all at once,
Exactly. We can focus on explaining, key elements, techniques, influences, building up understanding piece by piece.
it's about providing that roadmap for navigating the complexities of the art world.
Exactly. And just like in any other field, questions and feedback are crucial.
Right. It shouldn't be a one-way street.
Viewers should feel encouraged to ask questions, share their interpretations, and, engage in thoughtful discussions about the art they're experiencing.
It's about making art an interactive experience, not just a passive one.
Exactly. And that open-ended exploration is what makes engaging with art so enriching and rewarding.
Wow. This conversation about simplifying art has been so eye-opening.
It's a great reminder that clear communication can make any subject, even something as, subjective as art, more accessible and engaging.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from healthcare to finance to law, education, technology, and even art. What an incredible journey. Welcome back. So, we've explored these fantastic strategies for making complex stuff simpler across so many different fields. It's like we've been on this whirlwind tour of, well, just clear communication.
And for this final part, I think it'd be cool to shift gears a bit. Instead of focusing on specific fields, what if we think bigger? Like, how do we turn this into a mindset?
Ooh, I like that.
How can we cultivate simplicity, not just in, how we explain things, but in how we approach the world in general?
Yeah, it's like, it's not just a toolbox we pull out now and then. It's like upgrading our mental operating system.
I love that analogy.
Yeah,
So where do we even begin with something that big?
right.
Well, I think one really powerful practice is to just start paying attention to how information is presented to you every day.
Okay, so like,
Yeah, like when you're reading an article, watching a video, even just listening to someone talk, ask yourself, is this clear? Are there a bunch of unnecessary jargon or technical terms? Could they be using an analogy, maybe a visual, to make this easier to grasp?
so it's like developing that simplicity radar, becoming more sensitive to when things are just needlessly complex.
Exactly. And that awareness extends to our own communication,
Ooh,
too.
for sure. It's got to go both ways.
Yeah, so when you're the one explaining something, whether it's, a project at work or just a story you're telling a friend, think about your audience. How can you make this information as accessible and as engaging as possible?
Right, it's that empathy we talked about earlier, putting yourself in their shoes and trying to understand how to meet their needs as a listener.
Exactly. And this leads to another key part of, I think, the simplicity mindset, the power of questions.
Ooh, questions. So often we feel like we should already have all the answers, like asking a question is almost like admitting weakness.
I know, right? But it's actually the opposite. Asking questions shows that you're curious, that you actually want to understand more deeply, and that you're not afraid to admit when you don't know something.
It's a strength, not a weakness.
Exactly.
Okay, that's such a good reframing. It's not about pretending to be the expert. It's about being genuinely engaged in, well, in the learning process.
And that willingness to learn,
Yeah.
that's what allows us to navigate complexity, right?
So it's like this ongoing journey.
It is. Being open to new information, different perspectives, and even the possibility of changing your mind.
That's such a crucial point, especially in a world that often feels, so divided.
I agree.
It's about being comfortable with not having all the answers and being open to hearing what other people have to say.
And when we approach conversations that way, not just trying to, prove our point, but to actually understand, that's when real connection happens.
It's not just about making information simpler. It's about simplifying our approach to the world, to learning, to each other.
Beautifully said. And I think, one of the most rewarding things about this whole simplifying journey is that it allows us to connect with other people on a deeper level.
Yeah, it's like we're creating this space for shared exploration where we can, bounce ideas off each other, challenge each other's thinking, and really build upon each other's insights. Way more fun than just trying to figure things out on your own.
Exactly. And that collaborative spirit, it's so important for, fostering innovation, creativity, real progress.
When we're not afraid to ask questions, to share our ideas, to actually learn from each other.
We unlock something really powerful.
Wow, this conversation has been so inspiring. I feel like we've gone beyond just, communication tips and tapped into this whole new way of, well, of thinking and being in the world.
And I hope our listener feels that too. It's about cultivating that clarity, that curiosity, that connection. That's the real power of simplicity.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you want our listener to walk away with?
You have the power to simplify complex concepts. It's about choosing clarity, embracing curiosity, and really truly connecting with others in a genuine way.
And by doing that, we unlock the power of knowledge, we foster deeper relationships, and I think, we make the world a little bit brighter and a lot more understandable.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Until next time, happy learning.
Keep simplifying.